Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Tipsy Testing. My name is Jessica. I'm the Customer Partner Success Manager at Inflectra, and we are delighted to be here with you today. We are happy to welcome Bob Johnston with Critical Logic. Bob is currently the CEO and CTO there. He has been with Critical Logic since 2006, serving as CTO and now CEO. Bob has broad experience in software development and automated QA. He's been primarily responsible for creating and delivering software technology to support large and small testing projects and overseeing testing services implementation. Bob has over 30 years of experience as a developer, consultant, and executive in a wide variety of projects. He has helped found 3 consulting firms, most recently Critical Logic, and he has more than 10 years of experience implementing automated testing systems in many clients in a variety of industries. Bob has been a speaker at Star East, international testing conferences, auto tester user conferences, and the Bay Area Quality Association. He has provided leadership, technology, and testing consulting services for dozens of clients. Recently notable among them, the US Navy, Hewlett-Packard, Salesforce, and Wells Fargo, and even more. But I ran out of space for all of Bob's fabulous accomplishments. Bob, can you tell us a fun fact about yourself?
Fun fact right out of the box. Well, really glad to be here. Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I'll tell you a fun fact, a little bit of a story, as I'm going to show you this artifact here. This is a US Navy Annapolis Academy sword from my grandfather, who graduated from that in 1925. And he went on to be a naval aviator through World War II, and he ended up in Washington, of all places, and worked for many different government agencies. And ended up being a consultant to Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower at the time in the early 60s. And he was instrumental. He wrote the founding papers for NASA back in whatever year that was. He put together all the government aeronautic systems and the fights between the Army and the Navy and the Air Force about who was going to run the space program. And he came up with the idea of NASA being a civilian agency, and it was proposed by Jimmy Doolittle to the president. And that's how NASA started, with my grandfather. So I never knew that until about 5 years ago, because it was totally classified way after his death. Some of that was declassified, and I found out by reading some old papers in his estate effects. And I found out that I never knew it during his lifetime or most of mine, but my grandfather was one of the founders of NASA. There's a fun fact.
That is a really cool fun fact.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nice. And the sword is a good prop.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a good prop. Yeah.
I wonder what he would have thought of the Space Force. I was watching the TV show version of it with Stephen Carell, but even the new idea of a military Space Force.
I really don't have to wonder much. I know he's turning over in his grave. He's buried over in the Eastern Shore in Maryland. No, actually, he's buried in Arlington. In fact, okay. I was there when he was entombed in Arlington many years ago. So.
Wow. To Bob's grandpa. That's really cool.
My grandfather. Yeah. So
not too far away. If you come out, Bob, then we can go visit him. We can take a field trip to Arlington.
I would love to.
You can come to our house.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. Okay, and of course we have with us Adam Sandman. Adam has been a programmer from the age of 10. He's been working in the IT industry for the past 20 years. Adam's currently the Director of Technology at Inflectra, and he is interested in technology, business, and innovation. And we're going to tax him yet again for a fun fact.
And also, Inflectra was founded in 2006, the same year as Critical Logic. I didn't realize.
I didn't know that.
That's not my fun fact.
Fun fact.
That is a fun fact, but it is not my fun fact. So I've changed my fun facts. I was going to do something different, but actually thinking on the space theme, for those of you who are interested in British science fiction, British sci-fi, the high school I went to, which is called Ulster Comprehensive School in Wales, is the same high school that the showrunner for Doctor Who, Russell T Davies, went to. So he was 5 or 6 years older than me, and I didn't know him, but he went to the same high school as me. So any Doctor Who fans like myself was like, oh, wow, he went to my school. Not as impressive as NASA, I will say that. Sorry,
There you
Russell.
go.
You could, I don't think I'm divulging any state secrets, but by saying you're such a Doctor Who fan, no, I can't say this.
No, you can. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay. That aren't our servers
Oh yeah, they're all named
named?
Doctor Who characters. My
Oh,
laptop is. Are you a Doctor Who fan, Bob?
not really. I'm familiar with it, but I know. I guess can't say yes.
Okay, because yeah, this computer is called TARDIS, and our server in the office is Doctor, Master, Donna, Ood, Gallifrey, all the various worlds and characters from the literature. And in fact, in Spira Team, if you type the word TARDIS, the whole screen shakes.
Really?
You can try that at home, people.
Okay, I'm going to try it at the end of this meeting with.
There you go, TARDIS, TARDIS.
Okay,
There's another fun fact.
there you go.
All right, well, let's get started with our questions. We had a number come in from the audience this week. And why don't we start with Sam Fella? It might be Fells. I might have mistyped it. I'm sorry, Sam, in advance if I typed it incorrectly. But the question is, should you always set a goal of 100% automated testing, or should you expect some amount of manual testing? Should we start with Bob today?
Sure.
Start with me. Oh, great. Great question. It's actually a really good question. The answer is absolutely not on 100%. In fact, you really need to develop some criteria on what should be automated and what shouldn't. And it has to be, there's certain criteria like we'll set up. Is this test going to be used a lot? Is it a critical function? Is it easy to set the test up? These things say yes, if yes, yes. Then you say, okay, here's a good candidate for automation. A lot of the percentage of automation you do depends on other factors besides just, I want to automate this. It's like, how well controlled is your data, your test data, and your test environment systems? If they're not well controlled, it becomes the maintenance of the tests and the test data overwhelms the advantage of automation. It also is very important to know what level of requirements and specifications you're testing against, how accurate those are. If they're not very accurate, then human beings are going to be much, much better at those complex tests than it is to automate. Many times you'll find a human being can do a certain test, like are all the required fields entered. You can do that in one second. If you're doing that once a week, that's great. But if you want to write an automated test that checks that same thing, it might take you 20 hours of scripting to be able to write that very complex test where somebody could actually verify it personally with a glance. So you have to develop these criteria. I think a good rule of thumb is aim for your most common 20% of your testing as an automation target. But to automate 100% is almost never a good idea. You're really trying to unleash the brain power of your testing team to test things that aren't good candidates for automation, or too complex, or too counterintuitive, or just depend on human brain wetware knowledge that you can't automate. So your real goal is to get your smartest testers, which are always going to be humans, free of the drudgery of repeated easy tests. So the answer is no, never 100%. If you can get 10%, you're probably doing well. If you can get 40%, you're a rock star.
Well, less than 100.
Yeah, I think you've stolen most of my thunder. The one exception I think you're exactly right. Everything Bob said is 100% right. And I've actually even heard people like Michael Bolton in the testing community talk about automated tests as checks. So people stop thinking them as being necessarily something that's going to look to find a problem, merely something that checks to find a known problem, which is what they're best at. They're checking lots of things so that you can spend less time checking and more time testing. The one exception I've always think people tend to forget of is some of the non-functional stuff. To do a load test manually will be very interesting. Okay, everyone, when I text you, I want everyone to start using the computer right now on 1,000 computers. And in theory, you could do that. Versus a computer can generate 1,000 users worth of load really easily. And security testing as well. If you're going to try and hack into a system, there are really smart algorithms that have figured out how to do SQL injection, cross-site scripting, all that sort of stuff. So the non-functional stuff, I think you can get closer to 100%. Maybe not 100, but maybe 80, 90. For the functional stuff, I think it's much lower, like, yeah, 20, 40 at best.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, it's good to have that realistic aspiration.
I'm glad we agree.
We've tried to sell automated testing tools to people who try and make it do what a manual testing tool does, and it's like, please stop.
We have another question from another Critical Logic friend. What does testing look like 5 years from now and 10 years from now? This is from Evan.
Okay,
Adam,
Adam, you go first.
Okay, 5 years from now. So 5 years from now, it would depend, I think, and I'm going to talk about not functional testing, how the system works, because obviously load testing and security, there's a whole different world of what that's going to look like. Functional testing, assuming the AI gets smarter, assuming that applications stay as complicated as they are and are still built for humans to use, I think we're going to see automated tests get more sophisticated to do data. They can be able to recognize patterns, be able to find anomalies. So I think it's going to take away some of what we would consider as non-repetitive, will move to repetitive in 5 years. So I think the human tester, rather than manual tester, has to get better at things like experience, smart testing, user experience, how the system feels, almost like an emotional type of testing is going to get more important because the machines can do more of some of the, does it work, does it not work? We're also assuming on the other hand, we're assuming in 10 years, why would we be using web browsers? Will we be using two-dimensional screens? Maybe we're going to be using VR. I don't think so. As technology advances, the ability to write testing tools that can test that are also challenged. So if we start having everything being VR and video like we're doing today, rather than being just text or audio or whatever we're using before, there's a whole generation of tools that don't yet exist. So we end up going back to manual testing more. So it could go completely the other way in 10 years, because before websites, we actually had good automation tools. And then we realized that we moved to the web and now all the automation tools don't work. So we had a big step backwards. So I think it's always this sort of chicken and the egg. The technology we're testing, Internet of Things is going to be the same thing. How do you test your automated fridge? When you go thermostat, you probably can't use Selenium for that. So you have to think and you find new tools. So it's going to be manual for a while and then automated later. So there you go.
It's all. Crystal balls are tough here. One thing I do thinking ahead is to look back. Where were we 5 years ago, and where were we 10 years ago? Which I was around then doing this stuff, and surprisingly, it hasn't changed that much in terms of what we're trying to do, who's doing what. There's still a huge majority of testing is done manually by people at keyboards and just making up tests and stuff like that. There's a growing amount of technology that can test a lot better, a lot faster. Most of the gains we've had is in efficiency. I think that's going to continue. The efficiency of testing, the speed of testing, the maintenance of scripts and stuff like that is going to get better and better over the next 5 and 10 years. But Adam's quite right. What's really been changing is the integration of all these different components and the communication between these different layers of the cloud and the desktop, and now all this virtual stuff. And also we're getting much more visual. So what we have to test is a real challenge. And that challenge, from my personal experience in my company and so on, what we think is the real way that's going to change is we're going to start testing the requirements, start testing the specifications for applications, and then there'll be tools that generate the test for you and say, it's just too complex for human beings to write tests anymore. We're going to have some process, some tools. AI may be a part of it, or similar things to that, where we're actually developing test and test coverage algorithms that we need to test the complexity of all these new interfaces. That's going to be coming. So I think much of the testing is going to get moved, a common phrase today, move to the left. We're going to be testing the requirements, the specifications, the input to these programs that generate all the configurations and all the applications are going to be generated from specifications. So we're going to need to be testing the specifications and trusting the technology to might make the right and do the right testing.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Answer.
Moral testing is the other thing too. I
Yeah,
was going to say.
model-based
No,
testing.
not model, moral, as in ethical testing.
Oh, well, yeah.
We have algorithms right now that we don't understand who wrote them. Like the one that, and this is very timely, I think, with what's going on in America right now. There are algorithms that someone wrote that actually send people to jail for longer or lesser, depending on a bunch of factors. And they've now found those algorithms are trained on human behavior, and they're inherently racist. And no one knows how these algorithms work because they were machine learned from human data.
Right.
One called Compass. It was at a meetup I went to. It was very scary that our testing is based on models from data from human experience. And if humans are biased, we're basically encoding the bias into the operating system of our testing.
Yep. Yeah, and Adam, I just wanted to echo something you said about the emotional or the user experience is also going to be something that's commercially critical to get people to like your software and feel good about it and trust your stuff. And I think a lot of that is going to be engineered in and is going to need testing.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to give a shout out to Arlene. Hi, Arlene. It's great to have you on.
Hello.
Again.
Thanks for the tweet.
It's amazing. You're like a super fan. And so we're going to go with Arlene's question next, which is what, if any, changes do you see in established procedures given the change of content, distribution, and world events? Bob, you want to start this time?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question. Obviously, the key to all this is that remote workforce, was already becoming a pretty prevalent thing, but now even more so. So what that means is that the security and access to systems and test environments and so on is going to have to evolve quickly. One of the big problems we've seen with getting all these people remotely working is accessing into their applications and their normal software they use with computers at home. We know that there's lots of different ways to do that, from remote desktops to virtual machines and all kinds of stuff like that. So that complex hardware or topology of the actual, where's the system running, where's the software running, where's the user, where's the testing harness, all that is going to really challenge security. So security and access and creating, I think there's a lot of people working on this, but I think the need for security with remote workforce is going to outstrip our ability to actually create security there. So there's going to be some challenges for testing. We often try to test systems remotely and run into firewalls and problems that delay projects a lot. I think we're going to have to figure out how to do that faster, better, smoother, with more security. So that's the big thing I see changing, is remote work and remote access to systems, and testing them is going to be tricky.
Adam, do you have anything to add?
I think that covers a lot of it. Other things we're starting to see, I think, in world events are also data privacy, and the fact that with what's going on in the economic sphere, the global supply chains have been challenged, and people are thinking about, should I have all my supply chain assets, spread across the world in a pandemic? I'm now vulnerable. Well, your information assets are part of your supply chain. People are now starting to think, well, where's my data? Like, people using certain unnamed messaging platforms realize that a lot of the servers were in certain countries that we won't name either. And therefore, they didn't realize that. No one had thought about it. No one really cared as long as it worked. People are starting to look critically at their supply chains of information as well as their physical supply chains. And from a testing and DevOps and agile and standpoint, you need to think very critically about where's the vulnerability in your enterprise IT supply chain and where everything's being hosted. And do you have redundancy, resilience? If a whole team working in a data center has to go off, do you have backup access? One of our partners was talking at a webinar I was doing. He works for a utility company, and when everyone had to work from home, well, no one has access to this control center. It's where they actually control the power plant. You can't give remote access. You can barely let people into the place with security. There's no way you can do remote access. So what do you do now?
Right. Yep.
Yeah, recent world events are having a huge impact on how we all work, not just in the testing arena.
Definitely.
So, from taking it from a serious note to a more fun note, let's talk about cocktails. Bob, can you tell us what you're drinking today?
I'm drinking one of my very favorite things, which is Elijah Craig bourbon. That's fairly affordable. I think it's like $26 or something here. It's their normal 94 proof barrel small batch bourbon, and it looks like this in a glass. And that's what I'm drinking today, just bourbon and ice.
Very nice. Bourbon and ice is nice.
Yep.
What about you, Adam? What are you having?
Oh, well, I promised this on Twitter, so I went through with it. I have made a freshly squeezed daiquiri, and daiquiri is a cocktail that gets a really bad name because everyone thinks of those awful frozen things you get at terrible restaurants, chain restaurants anyway. It's actually just squeezed lime, fresh squeezed lime juice, and Bacardi, and then a little bit of a simple syrup, and I use an agave syrup that I got from a store. And that's it. So it's very simple. It's quite sour. It doesn't have all that sweetness that a daiquiri would have if you get it commercially made. And it's actually very, very nice. Not like that sweet frozen rubbish. How about yourself, Jessica?
That sounds delicious. And refreshing for a
It's great for the heat in
hot day
DC.
like today. Yes, that's both of you are drinking much more exciting things than what I have, which is a Santa Margarita Pinot Grigio, because it was the easiest thing that I could grab. So I apologize. I wish I'd been more creative.
One of my favorites.
Sorry,
I know that wine well. That's really, I love that wine.
Yeah. It's good. It's definitely good.
Santa Maria? Well, which one is it? Santa
Margarita.
Oh, okay.
Italian.
Okay.
Yes, exactly, with the H. But I'm very intrigued by the daiquiri. Maybe I'll have that.
I was going to say on Sunday, we're having a company socially distanced event in my front lawn, and we could knock some up.
Ah.
We have a Costco-sized bag of limes.
Perfect.
So
that sounds delicious. I'll hold you to that.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, let's go. I was about to invite everybody to your house on Sunday, but I realized that wouldn't be very responsible because
that would break all kinds of social distancing norms. We are doing it very carefully, very sane and safe.
Bob's always so friendly and inviting people to his house.
A circle of chairs and stuff in the middle.
I won't be able to make it, Adam. I'm sorry.
But in the future.
Next time. All right. We have another question from the Critical Logic folks. They've been on it today. Way to go, guys. Let's see. What is the relation between test automation and agile? And can you really automate in agile mode? Adam, thank you. Adam Richards posed the question. Adam Sandman, why don't you answer it?
Oh, sure. Well, test automation, I think, is an important enabler. Well, I won't say enabler, but if you're doing agile and you've got, depending if you're doing Scrum or Kanban, whatever, but let's assume you're doing a 2-week sprint in Scrum, inevitably you have to regression test something that you changed. And in agile, it's test-driven development. You have to anticipate change. You're continuously integrating. Inevitably, someone's broken something that you did previously that you didn't know was broken. You've got unit tests. You've got hopefully some automated other API service tests. If you don't do that, I don't know how you can release in 2 weeks. I don't think you can. Now, do you need UI function automated tests? Probably some, as Bob said to answer the previous question. So I think if you take automation in a general sense, which includes all levels, then I think 100% you cannot be agile without that, because you just can't have the quality. Otherwise, you're just releasing software without testing it, which is not agile. That's just chaos. And fun, maybe, but chaos, like a student project. So I think as long as you recognize that automation doesn't mean UI automation 100%, I think, yes, automation itself has to be part of it.
Bob, do you have anything to add?
Well, absolutely. Well, I think one of the things in our experience is that you need to be thinking of automation as one sprint offset from the current sprint. Like during a sprint, you will develop tasks that you want to run for this particular sprint. And if you're lucky, or if there's minor stuff, you'll have a test suite that's automated already. You should be able to run that in a regression fashion during the sprint. And new stuff, you should be able to, maybe you can run some of that during the sprint, but I think you need to be thinking about the tests for this sprint are going to be added to some regression library of testing that can be run during the next sprint to validate, you're holding together sprint to sprint. It's a challenge. One of the things, I mean, regression testing in general and just things like that are not really part of agile thinking 100%. So you kind of have to graft on this idea of regression testing. And people don't like to admit that, but you really can't have a serious complex system going forward without regression testing. So we think that your main goal of automation during a sprint is to add to the regression library for the next sprint. But very important, you can certainly automate tests and have automated suites in Agile sprints for sure.
Why do you say that people who do Agile don't like the idea of regression testing? I would think that, I mean, maybe they're thinking of the traditional manual, humans following a printed script regression testing, but I think if you don't regression test and you're changing things, how can you have any quality?
Well, that's I think that's my point, is that at least in our experience, people that are hard over Agile proponents, they just don't like, regression test isn't part of the vernacular, it doesn't seem.
Okay.
They just say, oh no, we don't do that. We everything we do is within the sprint. All the testing we do is within the sprint and so on. So the idea that there's some other cycle going on of testing outside the sprint cycles or in parallel to the sprint cycles usually doesn't fit inside an Agile manifesto type team very well. So, but we think that people who do Agile, really to succeed, they have to be doing these regression tests anyway. I mean, I think it's an essential part. And almost no one's doing real Agile. I mean, everything we see is some kind of modified or partial or Agile-like, that's part of the thing. But when you bring automation in, it does require some little bit of different thinking from the Agile project point of view to have a cycle of regression tests going on in parallel or in sync with your sprints.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I was waffling between questions, but I think we'll stick with another serious one, and then we can go to a fun one. Is there a best way? Now, this is specific to a company, and we haven't had this before that I'm aware of. So I'll go ahead and ask it, and then we can decide. We'll see how it goes. So the best way to handle timeouts while running Selenium UI tests from Sauce Lab. And either what is the best way to handle timeouts while running Selenium UI tests from Sauce Lab? Is that too inflammatory?
Maybe it should be too specific for Friday afternoon. I'm like,
I should ask that one first, Jessica.
That feels like work. That doesn't feel like Friday.
Well, maybe it'll be more creative answers now.
Yeah.
This is from Bashundara Yalamanchili.
Okay. You need to get some a hobby, mate. No, just. I don't actually use Selenium very much, and I haven't actually used Source Lab. Timeouts in general are hard because you have to figure out when is it a valid timeout, when is it an invalid timeout. Is the application slow and it's broken and you should fail? When is the application just slow to a standard degree and it's okay? I think understanding your user's experience of how fast something should be, and understanding is the bug in the testing tool, is the bug or the issue in the testing tool, is the issue in the application you're being testing. What is the appropriate response time? And if that's determined by an SLA, have you met the SLA? Is the SLA good SLA? I mean, even if that's what your contract says, if the user experience is so horrible, then maybe you still need to fail it.
Right. Well, I think Adam's answer I'm going to summarize by saying it depends. Right? It all depends on what you're trying to do. But in general, with any automation scripting languages, Selenium included, what we try to do is develop functions that basically are, we call them like readiness functions. So if you say, I'm about to push this button, is it ready to push? So you have the function that says, okay, what object am I trying to act on? What state does it need to be in? How long am I going to wait for it to be in that state before I raise an error? So the idea that you can't just code it that way. You have to have some very complex parameterized function that knows when it's waited too long, right? You can't do hard coded. You can't do wait 5 seconds. Those kinds of things are death and anathema to automation in general. So you need to have some general purpose function that you can call that can understand what it means to be the condition you're waiting for is there or not, and how long to wait to time out. As Adam pointed out, sometimes it's just, well, what's a reasonable amount of time to wait? And it may depend on network traffic or just performance of your computer. But it also might be an SLA where you say, well, if I don't get a response within exactly 5 seconds, that's an error in the application as opposed to some problem with the network. So it's complex and it all depends. It's not an easy answer, but I think the answer is bigger than any particular language or software package, that every automation technology has that same challenge. When do I know I'm waiting long enough? I've waited long enough. And take it as a reusable function. You're going to have to go write some code to figure that out, and callable function from the middle of the script somewhere.
One thing I just want to add is, having gone to some of the testing conferences, and the tools that we build, what they do is very much a deterministic, try X number of times, see if the object's available. Oh, it is, or it's not. If it's available, is it clickable? Is it enabled? A whole bunch of various attributes you check. Now that's what we've typically done, is you have that ahead of time. You know what you're going to do. Is it 10 seconds, 5 seconds? You try 20 times. But there are some tools that are emerging in the market which are trying to do AI-based, more machine learning, but looking at historical patterns. When we've run this test 100 times, historically, this particular button takes anywhere between 3 and 5 seconds. And so it starts to build a range and a standard deviation that's acceptable. So rather than having to know ahead of time, this is a 10-second versus a 5-second operation, the system can look for standard previous behaviors. And as long as that was considered acceptable, previous sprint, maybe we haven't made it any worse. Like I think Apple always says that every time they release a product, it should be no slower than the previous version, and it should be X% faster every time.
Yeah.
Well, this sort of ties into another topic for discussion, which is the cost of open source testing tools and the prevalence of Selenium. Bob, would you like to start on this one?
Yes and no. Yeah, I mean, open source, when we say open source, there's lots of open source out there, but the dominant one, of course, is Selenium. Selenium kind of developed at a time where other automation tools were really expensive, like QTP, and web applications were becoming, rapidly dominant in the world. So Selenium made sense at a time when you didn't want to spend all that money for HP license, and you needed something that tested web, right? It's really grown tremendously, but the open source and the idea that it's free is kind of something that needs some analysis, because the flexibility and the configurability of Selenium, of the Selenium ecosystem, really, there isn't any such thing as Selenium. Everybody that implements Selenium, there is something called Selenium, but everybody implements it differently with their own extensions and wrappers and everything else like that. So Selenium can be a really powerful tool, but it requires a lot of maintenance and a lot of skill to be able to build that. A lot of detailed code, a lot of complexity in the implementation, and so on. So I caution people about looking at Selenium as being a free, easy way to start. Commercial tools have all that maintenance, and they're automatically updated, and they're configured out of the box in certain ways that are much more simply to implement, and so on. So, to me, and the other idea is that almost no applications anymore are strictly web. Almost all testing now may have a web component, but you're also going to be looking at some desktop component and some service component and other things like that. So you quickly are stressing Selenium, and you see it now. Selenium is starting to add on non-web testing components as the market's taking them that way. So I would just say that some of the promise of it being open source comes with a cost, and I just say keep your eyes open when you make that decision.
Good advice. Adam, do you have anything to
Yeah,
add?
just to add quickly onto that, I read a study, I think it was 2 years ago at STPCon, that software testing professionals, that we're trying automation more than ever, and yet the amount of projects that successfully have automation is actually less now than when we were reliant on commercial tools like QTP and Rational Robot and back maybe 10 years, 15 years ago. So even though we have more people doing automation, the success rate has dropped, and the actual number of successful projects is actually significantly lower than it was, which was a startling statistic. And I think people were saying the large part of the problem is that everyone starts automation, the person leaves, particularly the test manager, the test lead leaves, and then no one can figure out how to pick this thing up, throws it away, starts again, and repeat. And so you end up with this constant reinvention. The one benefit a tool does give you is not just the fact that it's updating, it's that the tool kind of forces you to do things in a certain way, and people who know the tool, when they take over the project, will actually go, oh, I recognize this tool, I know its patterns and how it's set up, I can take it over, versus, oh, why did he write it this way? I hate page objects, let's get rid of page objects and start again. Everyone
Right.
has their own flavor.
Yeah, it's very code-centric, which is a kind of as you say, Adam, the projects that fail almost always fail in the maintenance side. That the systems that are being built and coded by the engineers become so complex and hard to maintain and very hard to change that they eventually overtake the cost and they collapse. So.
Right.
Great.
We do have a question that came in, Jessica. I don't know if you saw it on the question box. Do you see that? From Chris Wallander.
Oh, I see the question box.
I can read it out if you want.
But please, because I don't actually see the questions. Yes, please.
Okay, and I think that, Bob, you're going to like this one, or maybe not. Speaking of the ML, machine learning learned experience of based algorithms. So if you've got a system where the machine learning is building its algorithms itself, how do you foresee the transition of requirements documentation to account for this?
For machine learning?
So think of that example where you have a machine-based algorithm that's basically looked at sentencing data in the court system. It's built out this entire model of how it's going to sentence people, and judges are relying on it. And yet we as humans have no idea what it's doing. How is that requirement documented?
Well, that is an interesting question. It's going to be increasingly difficult, and from our point of view, you've got to have an algorithm for the algorithm, and so what we call that is you have to have a model that you can simulate what it's supposed to do. Right? You may not be able to see exactly or figure out how the machine learning or the AI decided to build the thing, but you have to be able to have a human understandable model of what it's supposed to do. So you can say, with these inputs, I'm predicting these outputs. I don't know what happened in between, but I ought to be able to predict the outputs given a set of inputs. And that's going to require some algorithmic help, some modeling, some kind of diagramming or something like that is human digestible, that can summarize and simulate the behavior so that you can test the expected behavior. If you don't know the expected behavior and you're only relying on the algorithm that built it to test it, that is a very risky thing to put your business at risk for. So we'll see. I think it's going to get better and better, and hopefully testing will say, well, there aren't any bugs, it's bug proof, but we know from experience that's really never going to be attainable. So
that is
Adam,
true.
what do you think?
I keep thinking of Terminator 2, actually. When we built Skynet and it became self-aware, because that's sort of what it's about. Actually, simulation is what made me think of a very interesting idea would be, if you have this algorithm and before you unleash it on the real world, you should have to build a sandbox, which is a simulator of the world it's going to be in. Because what you could have done is, to take this example, which I think is, again, very timely, about a court sentencing system which has racial bias, you have to build a virtual courthouse with basically an array of random suspects and random crimes. You get all the data that you'd expect to come in, and you run it through the algorithm. You look at the outputs. How did it sentence everyone? You look over a period of time, and then you correct that for what you'd expect based on the input data, human sampling maybe, and you look at it and go, is this actually an outcome that we believe in? And if the answer is no, morally, ethically, if it doesn't achieve the objectives of society, you've got to go back and see, how did it learn that? And then figure out how to tweak the model to unlearn things that maybe it's learned from humans that we wish it hadn't.
Yeah. So I think the way modeling and simulation is going to depend on being able to describe a set of rules that transform the input to the output. So,
Right.
How you visualize those rules, whether it's graphically, visually, or some algorithm that does it, you have to have that. You have to have, right now, most of the world is just testing against real systems, but the economy and the economics of it mean you really have to have simulators. I mean, any serious, like look at NASA and spaceships and all the stuff that's mission critical things. They almost always have simulations or models of what's happening to before they actually go build the real thing or trust the real thing.
Right.
Airplanes is another good example.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't do it for these kind of things. They literally they release this software into the wild, and people are being tested by it,
Yes.
which is crazy.
Yep. Or companies.
Right.
You don't have to be mission critical, but if your website goes down for a week, you're out of business.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So let's turn to a fun one now. Well, Adam, did any more? I think I'm not getting those this week. So did anyone?
Okay. Yeah. That's the only one I saw in the chat window. We also have a thank you from Arlene and I think envy about the drink we're drinking. So sorry. That's all we have though.
Thank you,
Chris.
Arlene.
Thanks, Alan.
All right, we'll turn to a couple of fun ones now. This one for Arlene and others who've been showing up week after week. For our super fans, you've heard this one before, but it never ceases to produce fun answers. So what is the most ridiculous, badly planned, ill-advised thing or feature or product or solution that you have ever been asked to test?
Bob,
Do you want a second to think about it? We could have
I
Adam go first.
do.
I don't think I haven't answered it. I've redone mine last time. And so, I'll give Bob a minute. It's not the ridiculous thing to test. Some of the hardest thing to test is to test the tool that you're testing with the tool you're testing. Because what we sell, I think as you do, Bob, we sell testing software, and so we use our own stuff. So we use Spira Team and Test to test our products, and we use Rapise for automation. But sometimes you get into this really strange world where I'm testing Spira Test with Spira Test, and I'm automating it with Rapise. But is the bug because Spira has got a bug that I'm testing, or is it because there's a bug in the tool I'm using to do the test? And then you forget which browser tab you're using, and you start getting mixed up between the live system and the new version, and it gets very meta. Sometimes we're testing a new requirements feature, and we really wish we had that feature because it would make testing that feature much better. We're like, why can't I use that feature? Oh, because I'm testing it. It doesn't exist yet. Rats. So testing your own stuff with your own stuff can get very meta sometimes.
I'll talk about something that almost happened and may still yet happen. We got involved with a company that makes software to control slot machines. And we were going to be working. We started in prototyping, and then this virus thing hit, and they pulled the plug or postponed that project. So it was we had started working on it, but it was pretty cool. Our scripts were doing things like virtually pulling the handle and virtually watching the dials spin and virtually spitting out $100 bills. That was a pretty cool and fun thing to be testing.
That would be really fun.
Yeah.
And interesting. And Adam, I have to say, I can't tell you how glad I am to hear that it gets kind of meta, because, I'm working for a technology company now, but I come out of public policy and political campaigns. So I'm on the people side of the company. And one of the first things I did at Inflectra was to test one of the versions that was about, and that was one of the most confusing, humbling things I've ever done in my life, to try to use the software, to test the software, and you're right, the various tabs.
Right, because you were testing Spira with Spira, having never seen it ever before, because we wanted a new perspective of someone who's using it for the first time. Terrifying
is what it was. That was the perspective. Now that I understand the tool a little more, I think it's great. But that's comforting 18 months later to hear you say that.
We still get terrified.
Okay, is there a song that sums up your philosophy, Bob?
Oh, wow. Sums up my philosophy. This is a tough one for me. I mean, I love music, but when I just want to listen to something that is familiar and comfortable and just makes my brain go right, it's usually a Beethoven symphony. Nothing exciting like, heavy metal or, an old Beatles song, but I particularly like Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. So if I need to focus or I just need to get away, or if I just want to have something that, takes me to my happy place, I'll put on some Beethoven Seventh Symphony and listen to that for a while. So, it's not headbanger exciting music, but that's what I like. I certainly like all kinds of music as well. I boy bands and Bon Jovi and things like that. One of my favorites is Huey Lewis and the News, because I actually lived in a place where I got to see him and his band playing before they were famous. So that was
That's cool.
those old Huey Lewis songs have a lot of fond memories for me too. But Beethoven.
I think classical music for this sounds very soothing for this time where we could probably all use a little bit of calm and peace.
Yeah. I like because I don't have to listen to the words. I can just feel the music. I don't have to say, what did he say? So.
Adam, what about you?
Well, I think I have the complete opposite song.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm thinking like, it's Friday. I've had no offense. We love you, customers. Customers, you're great. But there's Friday. Sometimes by the end of the week, customers are a little tired of them. So I always think, Twisted Sister, we're not going to take it. I love that song. We like blast out of the house down the ladder, if you've ever seen the video.
Yep. Well,
someone's play that really loud, and I'm like, yeah.
Okay, I'm with you there.
It's just it's another way to enter the weekend. It's just the daily work grind. It's not the customers. It's just the grind of the work day.
or you've done a git merge and it didn't work.
It's definitely not the employees either, right? I mean, they're just
actually no, it's not. No, it's never the employees.
Never the employees.
it's some of the customers, and it's often the technology.
As I know,
we love you, GoToMeeting, but occasionally not so much.
As I know, a good number of my employees are listening to me right now. They know.
Well, you both passed that test then. Good job.
All right.
And I think on that note, that wraps up our questions and our session. So thank you, Evan. Thank you, Arlene, as always. Bob, thank you so much for being here. It was great to have you on this end of the camera instead of on the Twitter feed. And we look forward to coming to your house. And
or vice versa.
Or vice versa.
Absolutely.
That's
right. Well, I don't feel like I'm drinking alone now because when I attend this, I'm drinking alone. And now I'm not drinking.
Right. All right. Well, then one final toast.
Okay. One final toast.
To a happy and peaceful weekend.
Peaceful weekend. Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you very much, Jessica and Adam. This is always fun. I'm a big fan of the company and these sessions. So thank you very much. I'm just glad to be here.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for coming, Bob.
We'll see you in person soon enough once this is all over.
Okay. All right.
Bye, everyone at home. Have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend, everyone.